Okay, we're live. So, good evening, and thank you for joining us. Our other participants are joining in from the waiting room. Thank you all for so much for joining us. I'm Suzanne Cohen. I'm the Managing Artistic Director of Mirror Stage, and we are here for the Playwrights panel. Hazel, can you turn Deborah's camera off, please? The attendees from the waiting room, thank you. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions in the chat box during the Q&A later, but from at this point, we're gonna have the 6 panelists and myself. I want to start again by saying I'm Suzanne Cohen. My preferred pronouns are she and her. And we would like to do a land acknowledgement. We're actually spread across the country right now, but the bulk of the participants are here in Seattle along with me. And so we do want to acknowledge that this is the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish, and they continue to reside here. And we honor them and the land, and thank them for allowing us to be here. We also would like to say a special thank you to For Culture, Arts WA, and the City of Seattle Office of Arts and Culture for providing funding to help make this programming possible. When COVID-19 hit and we were scrambling to figure out how we could stay digitally connected with people, we sent out a survey to our patrons asking what kinds of programming they might be interested in seeing. And several people had responded to say that they were interested in a panel with playwrights. So we invited we actually invited all 10 of our previous Expand Upon playwrights to join us for a panel, and 6 were able to join us this evening. And so I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourself and share your preferred pronouns, a little bit about your background as a playwright, and what your connection with Mirror Stage is. So if we go alphabetically by last name, Holly, that would be you first, please. Your mic is gone. Here we go. Oh, except, so Hazel.
Oh, great, I got it. Somebody let me unmute.
There we go.
All right. Zoom, it's so wonderful. Hi, everybody. I'm Holly Arsenault, she, her pronouns. I'm a playwright. Sorry, Suzanne, what am I supposed to say? A
little bit about your background as a playwright.
Sure.
And what your connection with Mirror Stage is.
Yeah, so I've been writing plays for about 11 or 12 years. I've been doing theater my whole life, but I wandered in the woods a little bit before I finally found my place. And my connection with Mirror Stage is that I wrote a play called Untitled Play about homelessness, a play in 9 parts for Expand Upon Homelessness, which was 2 years ago, 2.
It was last fall.
No, what?
It was October of 2019. It just feels like it's been 1,000 years since then.
Time is strange right now. And I'm really honored to be included. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Holly. We're pleased to have you. Amontane, you would be next.
Yes. Okay. My name is Amontane Amore, and my background, I started out as an actor, and then transitioned to writing my own one-person shows. So my first one-person show, Waiting for Billie Holiday, happened in 2006, and then continued to write one-person shows for myself for several years. And then in the last few years, I have expanded into ensemble plays. And I worked this year on a play called Memory Bus, which was for Expand Upon Gun Control. And my pronouns are she, her.
Thank you. So then next alphabetically is Trey. If you would like to introduce yourself, share your pronouns, a little bit about your background as a playwright and what your connection to Mirror Stage is. Are you muted? Okay, so Hazel, if you can unmute Trey.
Hi, there we go. Yeah, I'm Trey Calhoun, pronouns are he, him, his. And yeah, I used to live in Seattle. I was there for about 4 years, and Mirror Stage got me like right as I was about to leave. So I was able to work on Expand Upon Homelessness alongside Holly. And I wrote a play called Hand, and it was a really cool experience. And now I've moved out to New York City to. I decided to to work on a MFA in playwriting, so that's what I'm doing now.
Thank you for joining us from the Big Apple. Stacey, you would be next alphabetically.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stacey Flood. My pronouns are he, him. And my connection with the Mirror Stage is that I had a chance to work on Expand Upon Incarceration, which was absolutely fantastic experience all around. I started playwriting about 19 years ago, around there. But my background was mostly in creative writing, short stories and novellas and things like that. So the playwriting experience was just so much fun for me, and I just wanted to continue.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Cian, you are next up. Oh, we can't hear you. So sorry. Hazel,
I love this game. I love the Zoom game. I'm Cian Mendez. I use they, them pronouns. I wrote a play for what hasn't happened yet, but Expand Upon Gun Control, called In My Good Christian Neighborhood, an irresponsible play. And I started as an actor. I've probably been writing plays for like 5 years, but that is more than a fifth of my life ago, so that's funny. Yeah.
And you teach playwriting.
I do. I teach playwriting to the little ones. Sometimes the little ones that can't even spell yet, but on a good day, slightly older.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And Celeste. Hazel, can you make sure that Celeste is unmuted, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm Celeste Williams, and my pronouns are she, her. I wrote a play called Beavertown for Mirror Stage's Expand Upon series on immigration. And it was a great experience. I learned a lot. Is there anything else? Just kind of how I got into playwriting?
Yeah, what your background is?
Yeah, so I had gone to theater school a long time ago, and then got back into some theater and playwriting, I would say maybe 6-7 years ago. And it was mostly through Parley that I really started finding my playwriting voice, and just wrote a variety of plays, different topics. And I just find it this fantastic way to express myself and have diverse voices being told.
Terrific. Well, thank you. So I wanted to start the discussion because playwriting can be such a very personal thing, and there's not one right way to approach playwriting. There are many different ways of approaching the process. And so I was hoping that you each could share a little bit about what your more typical, if there is a typical approach for you, what where you usually find inspiration. Do you start with a character or a bit of dialogue or a story idea? What kind of gets you going initially? I don't want to assign people, if anybody is willing to share their process.
Sure, I'll start. Usually, I think that it starts with, so I feel like a lot of my work has autobiographical aspects to it, although I'm not writing plays about myself. So I'm not taking my literal experience. I'm taking something that might be like a memory or something that, there's so many things that happen to you throughout your lifetime. And a lot of them, I know I forget. I've forgotten. Because my sisters will say, remember when this happened, remember when that happened, and I don't remember it. But there are certain things that I always remember. So those things are salient in my mind. And so sometimes I take those things and use those as a jumping off point. And then I will take imagination to create the rest of the story. So it's kind of a weaving of memory, perspective, and whatever I can conjure up in my imagination. And part of the conjuring happens during the writing process.
So you don't necessarily have an end goal in mind when you start? You're not certain where the story might take you?
Well, usually, if I'm lucky, I have a beginning, a middle, and an end, sort of a loose idea of where the story is going to go and how it will resolve. But it's really just a loose idea. And as I start to write, I notice that I'll venture off into a lot of different corners, and there's twists and turns. And many times I think that I've lost my way. But then it usually ends up, when I look back at it, it's like, okay, this is the original structure, the original idea that I had. But I like to keep it loose so that the characters can speak to me, and that there's discoveries along the way, because that's really what makes it fun.
Okay, well, thank you. Celeste, yeah, I've been seeing you nodding your head a lot.
Yeah, no, I can really relate to a lot of what Montaigne said. I tend to write very intuitively, and my inspiration is also often autobiographical, but the stories can be told from a fish, or I've been writing a lot about animals lately, so I'll still have the essential character having this existential crisis, and it doesn't matter where that character is in their world. But I find that there are these a lot of my plays have similar themes, even if the settings are very different. But I like writing intuitively, because, as Montaigne said, I feel like sometimes the characters want to do and say things that my brain will sometimes want to take them somewhere else, but the characters really do seem to want to tell their story. And I don't know how else to say it. It's sort of like allowing that process to happen. So in some ways, I really like not doing an outline ahead of time and allowing it to unfold, because unexpected things happen. And then I have all these elements, and then I can kind of tie it together later in a structure. But I've been trying to just let it happen as I'm writing.
Trey, yes?
Yeah, I relate. I think normally my ideas come from images that are almost out of the blue. The last play that I started working on, it came like in a dream. Like I just woke up and I was like, and it sounds like, why am I dreaming about this when I tell you it was about like cubicles? I had like this idea of like people popping up from cubicles, like, and you could think of like synchronized swimming. And I was like, oh, that could be like really exciting, but also like super scary. Like maybe someone just like comes up with a knife or something like that. I don't know. I'm into lots of different genres. So like that was an example. I was like, what can I do with this image? And I let that take me someplace. One of the first plays I wrote, it was a very interesting little moment. I was in Europe at the time, just traveling around. It was right after I'd graduated. And I found myself in like a graveyard, and like a famous one. So like famous people who are dead. And I was like having all of these somber thoughts, and I was in my feelings. And then like someone came jogging by. I was like, why are you jogging? Like while I'm having this intense moment, I was like, there's a play from this image, like of someone like in the middle of a deep conversation or something, and then someone comes jogging by. It's like absurd and really interesting, and that turned into an entire play. So I think some of my best plays like come from images or just like those random inspirations.
Well, and now that you are in the MFA program, are you getting like specific prompts in class that you need to respond to, or is there a lot more freedom for what you need to write, or how constrained or free are you feeling in the program?
Yes and no. There's this one class we were taking where we went on a bunch of field trips. Like we went to see some like pro wrestling, for example. We went to see a trial about a stabbing case or a slashing case. So and it was just like write something inspired by this. And so like for example, the wrestling one was something that's sort of inspired by the structure of a wrestling events. You have the big hype up before the people come on, the two wrestlers come on, and then the match and how that undergoes. And like you think there's a clear winner, but something's about to happen. And so and that can take several different forms. I actually used this play that was in the cubicles for that in response to that prompt, just because there ended up being a fight that I wanted to happen within this cubicle setting, and it just made perfect sense for that sort of prompt. So it's freeing. I actually think that a lot of times when it's just like write anything, it's almost impossible because it's like it can go in any direction. So to get a little bit of like guidelines or boundaries, that can really be helpful, actually.
Yeah, I know for me that I've done more short story writing than play. I think playwriting is the most difficult kind of creative writing that there is, because it's super challenging to tell a story mostly through dialogue alone. In movies and in novels or short stories. In written word, you can use third person. I'm not omniscient. I can't even say it. But that does not. It's really, really tough to effectively use third person omniscient on stage. And so really to have the narrative moving forward solely through dialogue, I think is one of the main challenges of playwriting. And so for me as a creative writer, yeah, like having a blank page and being given certain prompts, sometimes it would take me to a completely different direction. But just sitting down and staring at a blank page is really challenging if you don't have something to inspire you initially. So Sienna, you had been also nodding in agreement. Do you want to?
Yeah, I had been, am nodding. Because I really relate to the image thing. I think most of my plays start from an image or a concept or an idea very out of grasp for my own life. Like, I guess I have to like really search after the thing is done to find where my life, bled into it automatically. But yeah, it's interesting that you say that plays have to be told kind of only through dialogue, because I think I got into playwriting because I thought I wanted to do directing, and like I learned through directing that what I actually wanted to do was to like impose images and impose ideas onto what was not written there. So bad. And I think a lot of my writing ends up being based in images and sometimes just like angry, aggressive stage directions saying like, no, this is what it looks like. You're going to figure out a way to make this happen. I need this image on stage. Like, just make it happen. But I think a lot of my playwriting is really led by an ebb and flow of dialogue and imagery or movement or magic. I think magic finds its way to everything that I write. But I think for me, playwriting is all in my head, and maybe like occasionally scribbling something down. Like I'm writing on an 18 by 24 inch sketch pad. So I have places to just suddenly be like, okay, here's one thing that exists, but I don't let myself write it until the structure presents itself, which sometimes takes so long and is never the same thing at all. So I just kind of let it create itself as a play in terms of genre or the order of events, or like, does the whole thing happen underwater? I don't know yet. Yeah.
Thank you. Because yes, I want to come back to a little bit later what you were saying about stage directions, because the stage directions in My Good Christian Neighborhood are almost a character in and of themselves. And so when we're talking more about expand upon and how that may be different from the regular process, I would like to get back to that. But Holly and Stacey, we haven't heard from you yet. I would like to hear from each of you what your personal approach and perspective is.
No, very, very similar. Sorry, go ahead, Allie.
I want to know whether Stacey agrees with Suzanne that playwriting is the hardest kind of writing.
It's just different. It's something where I think what's fun about it is that you do have to make a lot of things happen through dialogue, and you don't get the you don't have the luxury of having things happen through exposition. But I think with that though, it makes the heat of the moment stick a little bit better, because you really have to have things happen right through what people are saying, right? And there are two people, or if not an ensemble, right there on stage, and the heat of the moment, the heat of the scene is with their interactions. So I may start with an idea or with a couple of lines of dialogue or things like that. I really need to have the characters really kind of fleshed out an idea of who they are, what they want, before I actually start. Whereas oftentimes, if I'm thinking of more of a narrative structure of a short story or a novella, I could just have a wonderful opening, gorgeous little scene that I write out, and then figure out after that what's going to happen thematically. So I just think it's different, but I really like both. I like both so much. And some stories I come up with tend to lend themselves more to one than the other. Right? If I'm thinking about something where I want to have a more omniscient perspective, or I want there to be more of an internal reflection from a certain person, then I will go more towards a short story or novella route. But a lot of times when I just want the heat of people in the room trying to figure something out, and oftentimes their own desires or their needs may not directly conflict, but just sometimes just glance off of each other. But yet their inability to connect through that is a lot that I find interesting.
Thank you. So Holly, I know it's not something that you necessarily.
My question, and Stacey was already about to say something else, so I don't want to take the floor. You go ahead and say what you were going to say before.
Oh, were you? I'm sorry. Did I cut you off, Stacey? I'm sorry. Please.
No, you didn't.
No, I did. Wait, okay. So I tend to start with a situation. I usually get very interested in that kind of what if question. It tends to be something that's like close to familiar, but a little bit sideways. I like that, you know, a world that seems recognizable, but then there are things about it that we discover are not like our world, and getting to kind of invent those rules is really exciting to me. I really enjoy doing that. Sometimes I get inspired by the news. I wrote a play about a memory care facility where all of the women were having sex with the one male resident, and that's not a real thing that really happened in life, but there was a real story that inspired that. That was about, the play is about dementia and Alzheimer's and consent. And there was a real life situation that I read about in the news that I just thought was so rich with dramatic possibilities. And then there's always kind of a like, I'll sit with it for a while and think, is it still kind of working in me? Is it still working in me? Like, do I still feel as excited about it? And then there's also the question of like, am I the right person to try to tell this story? And in that case, my mother worked her whole career in long-term care, and I lost both of my grandparents on my mother's side to dementia. And so it was very personal for me to talk about this really interesting, really unresolved issue about Alzheimer's and consent, and specifically sexual consent for people who are suffering from Alzheimer's and dementia. So yeah, but then it goes, you know, then it starts there and then it goes wherever it goes, like everybody else is saying. And I don't outline either. I always feel like I should become an outliner, but I'm just not an outliner.
Well, so how did the Expand Upon Commission impact each of your processes? And what kind of challenges or surprises did you encounter along the way for that? Does anybody want to?
The biggest challenge for me was just starting out with this set cast, right? So I had a set cast. I had descriptions of who they were, or who they would be, and then at that point, kind of writing around that was because that's completely different than, of course, my known process, right? Kind of let the story build out the characters, find what the story is going to be, but just having that set number, and I want to make sure that every person in there had some time, if not the same time on stage, at least the same impact to the story. So really making sure that each person, when they came in and they came out, that they really had an influence on what this story was going to be. So that was really different for me. When I used to do a lot of business travel back in the old days, before this whole thing hit, I would write a lot on planes. So I'd have so when I was writing this piece, I had the pictures of the actors up on my screen. So I was okay, now I have to make sure that I always keep in mind who it is that's in the scene, who has to come next, or what their relationship's gonna be between each other and things like that. So it really is a new process, fun to do because it's completely different than what I've done before.
And so, yeah, I guess actually for the people who are watching on YouTube or other attendees, those who might not be familiar, I should explain a little bit about the specifics of the Expand Upon commissioning process, because usually playwrights will write the play and then it would be cast afterwards. And for Expand Upon, the community selects the theme, and then we precast 8 actors, various ages, various racial ethnic backgrounds, various gender identities. And we approach the playwrights, and when they agree, yes, they would like to write a play in response to this theme. And we say, here is a slate of 8 actors. You need to choose a minimum of 4, and you can use up to all 8. And so we have 2 playwrights for each topic. So, because again, there's no one right way to approach a topic or respond to a topic. And so to show the multitude of perspectives to approach it with, but you can even still have the same actors tell very different stories. And so that's part of what Stacey is referring to in terms of like, yes, here is your cast. Now please write something. So I just wanted to clarify that before everybody else chimes in. So, because Celeste, I think you had wanted to say something.
Yes, definitely what Stacey said. I was, initially worried about that because when I had first heard about writing about immigration, I was thinking, okay, well, I'm half Japanese. Maybe I'll go that route of Asian immigration, either the internment camps or Chinese Exclusion Act. So that's where my brain initially went. And then when I saw the demographics of the actors, it was great actually, because I'm like, oh, wow, I have all these actors, all different backgrounds. What can I do with this? So then I just ended up taking a completely different approach. And that's, when I ended up looking at using you know, this beaver colony coming into this human world as kind of a metaphor for immigration, and then kind of having this opportunity for these diverse actors to be able to, yeah, all interact together in this one world.
Thank you. Others?
Well, I had, my theme was gun control, and I had never written a play from somebody else giving me a subject matter. And as you know, people are saying, having a set cast. So that was challenging, and the themes are big. Gun control is a huge subject. So how to, there's multiple possibilities, I mean, many possibilities. So how do I narrow it down? So that was challenging, but I also liked that because it gave me a lot of freedom. And I ended up starting with a character that had been a victim of gun violence. And then from there, as I was researching gun control, it became pretty obvious that there's a lot of different perspectives on it. And so instead of just like putting forth one perspective, I thought it would be important to include as many different perspectives as I could. So then I created the other characters around this original character, all with their own perspective and their own way of how they experienced this event of this particular violent act. And I found it to be challenging, but I also found it to be fun.
Good. I'm glad that it wasn't all just a slog. And Trey, yes, did you want to say something?
Oh, did you have a question for Montaigne or someone?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I would definitely agree about the cast being the most difficult thing. I've actually come back to the play that I wrote a little bit, and and also we have like the time limit of only 60 minutes. I don't think you said that before.
Right.
Yeah, so, and I've added about like 10 more pages, so that's about 10 minutes to it. And I also added another character. So just like after seeing it, like that something was missing, definitely feeling like what I wrote was too big to be told in like a 60-minute story. That was definitely a tricky part. And yeah, definitely just like not having enough time with the actors. I knew Hazel before, who's on this call. She's wonderful. And so like I knew her, she was one of my actors. But I didn't know the other 5 people in my cast. And I think that was particularly difficult because I wanted to go a little bit more abstract with my play and a little bit more philosophical. And so, you know, it basically, if you don't think that way, or if I haven't had enough time to like even talk to you about some of the different ideas in the play, then it's like I you know, it can easily go a different direction. And so that was just like something in terms of like my writing process, just not getting enough time, partially because I moved to New York, so that was my fault. Not
it's a really tight rehearsal process too. I mean, yeah, it's a short development, and it's, you know, I think of it as kind of more of a launching pad necessarily than having a fully formed, polished thing. But, you know, yeah, we because of all the moving pieces and you moving across the country, and, you know, yeah, the challenge of discussing the deeper meanings within it, we didn't have as much opportunity to discuss it, I think, as if we'd had more time and to develop it. Yeah,
which is okay. As you said, it's a jumping off point, and it was still really fun to get to see them do it. And that was great.
well, good. Yeah, as I get all scattered, sorry. So Sienna, I was going to ask you in terms of what Amontane was saying and how very different an approach in terms of your script. Do you want to say a little something about that?
Absolutely. I'll try to make it short, but I think in a lot of ways my process started more similar to Amontane's process. And like, I guess immediately I knew the topic of gun control. I'm from Texas, and I'm from Texas, like right on the border of, so this is me, and then this is the extremely wealthy, like Christian, my lawn is nice families. And I ended up going to high school with most of those families that I did not really relate to. But in recent history, there was actually a bill passed in Texas that allowed guns to be in some of the classrooms. So immediately I was thinking like, wow, that's the worst thing that's ever happened in the world. Got to tune into that. So at first my play started like very serious, and it was about gay teen suicide in reference to these guns being in a classroom. And it was just like very dark. And I realized it was just kind of hitting the idea over the head, which I'm not about as a playwright. So I realized pretty quickly that it had to be satire and it had to be absurdism. So the play got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I had to lasso it down quite a few times to ground it into something. But I think the form began to take the lead. Like I was talking about before, like I don't really know what the structure or the form is going to be at all. And I couldn't write it until I realized it was this bouncing off the walls, not real world, like way bigger than us kind of society. Where like they call one of the characters mommy the whole play, all of them do, and one of the characters is completely silent. So I think because of it being so far away from our reality, I had to let the stage directions kind of take a lead part as well, because there are certain aspects that, I mean, that could not be created in a way that was more naturalistic. I don't think the play would have been able to exist unless the stage directions rose it up to a new level of like, oh, this doesn't quite make sense. Oh, we have to go a little bit too far. So I think that's kind of what happened there.
Is this the first absurdist play that you've written, or do you?
Yeah, I have one short play that is a bit, I guess, almost similar in tone. It's called Joke Scarcity. And it's just about like a world where nobody can tell jokes anymore because nothing is funny anymore. Because we're just like, oh no, everything has to be PC. We can't tell jokes anymore. So I think that play kind of lived in a similar realm, but I rarely have two plays that kind of share a genre. But the play I'm working on now, I think I've kind of like launched myself into a different realm. We'll see what happens. Because the play I'm working on now, when you say a lot of plays, when they're written, it'll say like it calls for 6 men, 3 women, whatever. And all I say is that this play calls for 12 horses and 2 humans. And it's about the Kentucky Derby, and my favorite racehorses are characters. So I think it just depends for me.
Okay, well, thank you.
That sounds awesome. I would like to see it.
Yeah. I'll have to actually write it then.
Holly, did you have anything else that you would like to add to what challenges or surprises that expand upon?
I mean, I echo everything that everybody has said. Like, yeah, having the cast, knowing who they were, but not spending time with them before writing, is a challenge. But I think, ultimately, like somebody has already said, like one of those constraints that that can be creative, right? But I was certainly very nervous the first read through when we met with the cast, because there's a different kind of pressure when you've written specifically for individuals, and you want to honor them and who they are in their fullness, and that's hard when you haven't spent time with them, so but I loved my cast so much, gosh. And yeah, then it just became a fun challenge of like making sure everybody had enough to do, and just wanting to like show how great they all were. And remember, Pratik wasn't in my play originally, and then I was like, well, you're awesome, because I heard him read Trey's, and then I was like, well, and so I wrote a whole new character into the play because I just wanted everybody. So that ended up being good, but it was definitely something that, and then yeah, just the size of the scale of the issue.
You did a lot of interviews and personal research.
I did. I think, in particularly writing about homelessness, it mattered a lot to me to honor the stories of the people I was talking to, particularly when, with an issue like homelessness, discussing an issue where we were talking about the experiences of folks who are some of the most marginalized folks in our society, and people who are not heard from. And, so yeah, it was very important to me to get it as right as I could. And yeah, I did. I talked to people, and that was incredibly educational for me, both as an artist and just as a person.
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of these huge topics, the themes that were selected and that you were each commissioned to respond to, did you learn more? Were there things that you were surprised to learn about over the course of developing the script and preparing for performances? And sorry, my dog wants to be part of this meeting. Yeah, Sienna?
Oh no, I'm saying please, dog. Yes. I guess a lot to talk. Hard question to answer. I think in a lot of ways I didn't, because I mean I am from Texas once again, and gun control, it was a common conversation that I was exposed to many different perspectives. And I think because of that, and this might be irresponsible as I note in my script like 10 times, but I think because I've heard people talking about it so much, I kind of chose to just trust that, and to trust that the characters don't necessarily know what they're talking about either, and that the characters are going to say the wrong thing or be swept up in their own idea of how things should go. And I think because of that, like, researching gun control and how it's affected other situations didn't really, it didn't feel like a tool that was really presenting itself when I was writing. And what I really needed to know was, like, how do these specific people live in their views about this? Because I think gun control and most of these issues that we're covering, people are so set in the way that they view it. I think with topics so vulnerable and so sensitive, most characters that I found aren't really open to change, especially not in 60 minutes. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, yeah, Trey?
Yeah, so it sort of came from just the writing process. So the premise of my play was that there's this after-death society. You can call them ghosts if you want to, but they're called the Karmic League, and they needed a new member. And so this person who has been homeless for the majority of his life wants to apply to be on this Karmic League. And so they're basically interviewing him. And so what I thought that pretty much all that the play would be about was him stating his case, him saying why he's worthy of being recognized. And I think that's still in the play. However, something that I ended up finding along that journey was the interviewers ended up bickering a lot, and they weren't really hearing his story. And I just thought that was so fascinating. Like, and so his largest struggle ended up being like just trying to tell his story. And I think that's so true of many people who are experiencing homelessness, especially those who are, living on the streets a lot, and they don't ever get the opportunity to tell their story. They might get a high and then they're completely ignored, right? They don't even get to fight for themselves. And so that was something that for me was a takeaway of the project. Like, what would it be like to at least allow someone to start to tell their story? You know, I can't hear everyone as I'm walking, you know, to the grocery store or whatever it is, but to at least acknowledge someone and allow them to state their case. I don't know, that at least felt like at least one step that I could take in feeling like I'm not, you know, so bad in the system, you know, such a criminal in terms of how homelessness is. So.
Oh, sorry. Apparently Boomer has an opinion about that as well. Sorry. Stacey, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, so for me, it was learning a lot about the different perspectives on the situation itself. So I think I came in with the idea of course, there are some serious issues with the criminal justice system, as we all know, serious issues. But in learning from the experts that were brought in to speak about the issue, was really the complexity of it, the different players around it, how things like the school to prison pipeline, in a sense, how that whole thing works, or the idea behind it, and all of that really helped to inform the characters themselves that I built out, to say, okay, the person in this certain situation, how would they react, and why have they reacted this way for such a long time? Being a part of a system that many people in it feel like they can't change, but it's been something that was really important, getting the information, the statistics, the ideas, the misconceptions. Again, I think that everyone has an idea around the things that are broken apart about it, but how to best fix it, how to address it, all of the information that was provided prior to me starting to work on it, that was really helpful for me.
Thank you. Yes, Celeste.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, it's funny, it does seem like it was so long ago, but I think it was, what, a year and a half ago or something? Yeah, anyway. Yeah, I've been reflecting upon this, and you're working on this project where it was really putting these themes together, but I'd been really thinking about the parallels of white European colonialism, and that, you know, in my play, the taking over the fur trade, and that's why the beavers were all wiped out or nearly wiped out to extinction. And they just became such a clear parallel to me about what's happened to indigenous cultures, and then how Americans treat all these different immigrant groups as the other, and this continuous marginalization of people who are un-American, and the rhetoric that just is pervasive, and the anti-Asian sentiment that was coming back during COVID, and all the recent events with George Floyd. And yeah, so it just, but I feel like I was really thinking about this during that play, and those same themes are continually coming up for me. And even in the program I'm in, which is this, you know, master's program in biology, I've been thinking a lot about even the rhetoric used a lot within the science community that demonizes species that are not from here. You know, this kind of invasive species rhetoric that I've been, you know, I wrote a short play based on, you know, the quote invasive Chinese mitten crab that Suzanne has seen. But I'm really noticing how all of this is coming together, and it all seems to come back to white European colonialism and all these different impacts that happened from that point on that still continue today. So I just needed to say that.
Well, and your Chinese mitten crab play is also available to be seen by others on a website.
That is true. I could post that.
Yes, we could share the link.
Yeah.
What other projects are people working on now? If you would like to mention anything quickly before we move on into the Q&A section, are there current projects that people would like to discuss, mention, talk about at all?
Well, I'm presently writing a play that involves the police killing of a young Black man. It does have a different kind of spin on it, which I won't mention at this point. But yeah, I'm working on that right now.
Anybody else?
Sure. Yeah, I'm kind of working on 3 different things at once, which is very typical of me in that I've been making a ton of changes, to In My Good Christian Neighborhood, which for those watching hasn't actually happened yet because it's been postponed and postponed and postponed because of Mr. Coronavirus. And so I've changed a lot on that. And then I'm also writing something closer to realistic magical realism rather than more absurdist magical realism that's addressing like deep vulnerabilities with me. And I think I've realized through that I'm not a vulnerable person with almost anybody besides like the plays that I'm talking to and figuring out. And then in addition to that, I'm also writing a play about horses. That's like absurdist, maybe family historical drama, who knows? So I think I'm kind of coping with everything that's going on by writing 3 different things that take different parts of my energy and I guess feel comforting no matter where I am in the cycles of what's happening in the world, emotions that we're all feeling right now.
Yeah. Oh, you can go.
Trey, you go.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to diversify my interests in the time of COVID. We don't know what the future of theater is. In New York, things are stalled till next year, at least. But so one thing that I'm working on is a game, essentially, a story-based game, and so driven by some of like the theory of Auguste Boal, him, and Theater of the Oppressed and his idea of rehearsal for revolution, this idea of like how what are the choices that we make and what are the effects of them? Can we go back and change them? And so you can almost call it like a choose your own adventure style game. And so I basically just want it to be super story based, and I think what's sort of novel about it is there are things that there have been games like that in the past, but just how it can be multiplayer because our world is multiplayer. It's not a solo thing for the most part. We're doing this with other people, and how my decisions and their decisions, how we can work together or not work together, and what are the effects of it, and what are the outcomes. And that's something that I'm just looking into right now.
That sounds fascinating.
I'm also working on 3 things at the same time. I had a production, like a lot of people had a production canceled because of COVID, which is a bummer, but other things have kind of come in to fill the void. So I have a internal, like a private reading next week at Seattle Rep of a play that I wrote called Court, which is a play for 2 13-year-old girls that I'm very excited about. And then in August, I'm doing a workshop of my play, The Great Inconvenience, that we did at Annex Theater a couple of years ago, but I've rewritten the majority of it, but I'm getting back with the same cast who are now actually mostly spread all over the world, which is kind of a great benefit of our weird Zoom thing, that we can get everybody, even though someone's in South Korea and someone's in Chicago. And I think if you are a SPT subscriber, there will be a way to see that eventually. The thing at the Rep is not available publicly. And then in December, I'm writing a play for ACT Theater called Sweet Baby Jesus, that is about a woman who compulsively steals the baby Jesus out of the nativity scenes at churches. It's a Christmas play that came from the news. It was inspired by news. And that will be a a public reading, although in what format, in what time and space, nobody knows. So that's in December, that act.
Okay, something to look forward to. Yeah, I mean, we had, sorry, as I adjust here. Yeah, the Expand Upon Gun Control performances were originally scheduled for May, and we've postponed to October. But it's looking more and more likely that that's going to need to be Zoom performances online, because I don't think that we'll be able to have the actors in proximity even to do live streaming from the theater. So Amontane and Cian will be discussing that more in the next couple of months, but we are still looking at different ways. And like Holly was saying, though, having Zoom as a platform, as a way to still be able to have people in the same place. There's some things that we discovered during the activism brunch when we did teaser scenes using Zoom. There were some aspects of the scripts that lent themselves more easily to Zoom, and other things that were more challenging. And so we'll talk about that offline at another time. So it's 6 o'clock now, and I wanted to open it up for the Q&A. So I'm actually going to make sure that the chat is on now. I believe it is. So people should be able to, for our attendees, if you have questions that you would like to ask the playwrights in general or a specific playwright, you can click on chat at the bottom of your screen, and it will open a chat window to the right, and you can enter a question, and we will read out loud, so that we'll be able to have it captioned for people who are reading the captions on YouTube, or the people who are viewing via YouTube and aren't able to see the chat box. So I know that there were a number of participants, and so if you should be able to see the chat box now, if you have questions that you would like to ask. There might also be a way to raise your hand if you are having trouble finding the chat box. Nobody have any questions?
We're super friendly.
Okay. Nobody bites.
My husband has just texted me a question because I was telling him what burger I wanted for dinner. And his question is, what was it like to start with an idea instead of starting with people? Which we've kind of addressed a little bit, but does anybody have anything else they want to say about that? Start with a topic.
Yeah, just as I said before, was a huge undertaking to figure out how to narrow it down when you have such a big subject matter. But I had never before written a play from someone giving me a subject. And I feel like that allowed me to think in different ways. I would probably have never written this play or written about this particular subject if it hadn't been for Mirror Stage. So it allowed me to kind of come out of how I normally would do things and to actually engage myself in a different kind of way. And that opened me up. So I think it was a rewarding experience in that way.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. One thing I was reflecting on was how different it was to know that an audience was going to come in and see it who already knew what it was supposed to be about, right? Like that like sometimes that's true depending on kind of how your play is and how it's marketed, but like this was so clear, right? Like this is a play about X, and if you are interested in X or you have your idea about X, you should come. And so it just sort of changed the way I thought about like how people might be arriving to the work and how they may have thought about their own opinions about it in advance, and how I wanted to kind of challenge that, what I thought might be their pre-existing opinions. You know, it's just a different way of thinking about how a work is going to be received by an audience when there's less of a kind of reveal about the subject matter, right?
Yeah, also, Holly, I think you said we did a panel back in the day. I don't remember when it was or the name of it. You mentioned, I think it was you mentioned something about that, the fact that, you know, we're not experiencing homelessness, or at least I've never have. And so like that just being what is our end? Like, are we telling stories that aren't ours? And I think that is definitely a tricky part of it as well. I've written characters who, you know, were experiencing homelessness before, but I wasn't trying to tell their story. You know, I wanted to feature them. I wanted them to be seen, but not necessarily telling their story, if that makes sense. And so now to be telling their story when that wasn't quite me, or I don't know that many people, I guess I don't really have any personal connections like that with anyone who is, right? So like, how do I do this? I think fortunately for me, I'm very interested in intersectionality. So what are the underlying causes or issues between different social topics? How can being othered as a Black person, how does that relate to being othered as you know, someone who's experiencing homelessness, that sort of thing. And I think that just helped me find my into the subject, and just find my grasp in relation to the characters a little bit more.
Well, Hazel had posed the question, what playwrights inspire you?
Funny, because recently I had a chance to reread The Piano Lesson, and just how that's structured. I just particularly like having seen it so many times, but then just reading it again, seeing how well that's structured, just how every little section of it builds dramatic tension at the same time. You have these characters that are working towards, again, the same ultimate goal, but it's thinking about it in two different ways. I mean, I thought that was just, yeah, I went back to that one and say, of course, you can't go wrong with anything August Wilson, really, but just just looking at that, it's like, this is just
That's
expertise.
Funny.
Yeah.
My brain went to Wilson first too, because I just reread Fences.
Oh, okay.
My God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, others?
Oh, I was going to say Kia Corcoran and Suzanne Lloyd Parks and Arthur Miller.
I think I'm really inspired by very contemporary playwrights. I think Sarah Ruhl always really sticks out to me because she really allows herself to let magic lead a lot, which I really try to lean into as well. But aside from that, I've noticed very recently kind of a resurgence of what we used to have in the past of types of theater kind of as blocks, whereas I think kind of the 2010s, 2000s didn't really have a set theme of what we were seeing in theater. And now there's been this contemporary upheaval of just a complete attack on structure and genre And I think playwrights that really stick out to me are Claire Barron, who wrote this play called Dance Nation that I was working on as a dramaturg as I wrote in My Good Christian Neighborhood for Expand Upon, which I think really definitely influenced me, because Dance Nation specifically is about a dance team of 12-year-old girls, and it's so heightened and horrifying and so real. And if you did anything competition based at all as a kid, it just like really hits close to home. But she intentionally asks that, like, don't put kids on stage. These are all adults, like any age range. We had a cast from probably 23 to in her 60s or so, playing these 12-year-old girls.
Expand Upon Homelessness.
What was that?
She was actually in Expand Upon Homelessness.
Marty, yeah.
Yep.
She's incredible. Also, just the cutest little button. And I think that, and then someone that sticks out to me as well is Kate Benson, who doesn't have many plays, it seems, that you can access, but she does have a play called, let me try to get this because it's necessary for everybody in the world to read. I think it's called A Beautiful Day in November on the outskirts of the greatest of the Great Lakes, or something along those lines. And it's a play about Thanksgiving, and all of the characters are just archetypes and stereotypes, and their names are like Cherry Pie and Republican, which I think, and it's in the form of a game show. And I think that really formed me as well, in just letting characters be absurd things. The protagonist in the play that I wrote for Expand Upon is named Hoodie, because he wears a hoodie. So
Yeah.
I would go ahead.
I was thinking of Annie Baker earlier because you were talking about other writing forms, and she went to undergrad for dramatic writing, and now is a famous playwright. And one thing that she said in an interview was that playwriting is a lot more freeing, just because like when you're doing like more of that dramatic sort of writing, you have to be like super, like every word has to be perfect, or otherwise people are going to scrutinize you, that sort of thing. But with playwriting, since it's just like speech and humans are just so, it can talk in so many different ways, just like me stuttering right there. We are so imperfect when we talk. And I just wanted to comment on that. That's one thing I like about playwriting. Like it just feels freeing. I can have the character say whatever, because I don't know, humans say whatever. But also she's one of my favorite playwrights because you could almost say that it's hyper naturalism what she writes. But I think what's great about it is basically it's about the tragedy of the everyday. And I think that's something that I'm super interested in. Just, what are these things that are happening to us every single day? It doesn't always have to be heightened sometimes, and sometimes that's really great and what's needed to tell the story. But what is happening around us every day, and that is tragic, that isn't quite talked about. I think that could be great.
I would also add that many of the writers that inspired me were not necessarily playwrights, but they were working in other forms. Like I would say my greatest inspirations are Nikki Giovanni, poet Nikki Giovanni, and novelist Toni Morrison. Because when I was growing up, those were like the first things that I started to read where the characters were different than what I had been given in school to read. And so Toni Morrison's novel, The Bluest Eye, really was the book that made me want to write and made me feel like I could be a writer. And, the subject matter of this little Black girl who doesn't think she's beautiful because she doesn't have blue eyes. And so those kinds of things made me realize that there's so many different kinds of things to write about that we hadn't been writing about, that was not getting the same kind of attention as the kinds of things that we read in school from the European canon. So I would say that those two writers in particular were ones that inspired me to write in general.
Celeste, did you share?
I don't really have anything to add as far as playwrights. I'm honestly not sure if I've been influenced by any particular playwrights, but I've noticed my humor, and there are certain things about my style that I know are influenced by like the screwball comedies of the 1930s. There are certain like old TV, there's like elements of old TV shows, Bugs Bunny cartoons. I know there's a little Marx Brothers in there. I think there are just a lot of little influences that have impacted my humor and the way I tell stories, and the banter that I really like in dialogue. And that's one thing I love about playwriting, is being able to have quick dialogue and being able to tell stories that way.
Okay. Well, we have a question from Sasha. In tandem with having a cast you may not know well, what is your process for getting to know your characters in preparation to show a slice of their life during your performance?
Inconsistent, I think, would be my answer, which seems to be my answer for everything. But I think I always want to know, like, what do they care the most about? Whether that be, I think a lot of times that presents itself as their career, but it can be a lot of things, like how close are they to their family as well. And then something that always really, really helps for me is like, what's their favorite outfit? Or what do they keep in their pocket or something like that? Just the smallest little in to who we are as people, I think, defines somebody so well, just so that you know the cadence at which they speak, which I think forms an entire story that's based on, like, playwriting is inherently based on musicality and cadence and rhythm. And I think just by knowing, like, are they constantly hearing a jangle of coins in their pocket? Is that going to affect the rhythm that they speak at? And I think that kind of how I get to know them.
Yeah, to jump off of that, you mentioned career, and that's something usually I don't know if it's one of the first, but like it's definitely up at the top of the things that I think about, which I hate, because I'm like, this is so capitalist. Like I have to figure out what they do for a job to like figure out this character, and that sucks, but like it makes sense in some ways, because it's like, what do they spend the majority of their time doing? And unfortunately, we end up spending a majority of our time working, sometimes for those jobs that pay the bills. I'm not going to say too much about that, but yeah, and then that can be a jumping off point. Like, is this career what they're actually interested in? Does that represent their life in some sort of way? Or does that contrast what they're actually interested in? Is how does that affect the rest of their life? Obviously, writing about homelessness, that opened it up a little bit more, but still there's a question of like, what are your dreams? Maybe that's me as a Pisces speaking, but like, yeah, what do they dream of doing? Like, I find that so motivating.
I'd like to get into the psychology of the psyche of the characters. So speaking of Pisces, I will sometimes figure out what sign they are and take some of those characteristics. And also, what are some of the things that have happened to them, particularly in childhood, that has formed their psyche? Mm-hmm. And that helps me to understand how they will react to certain things and how they will interact with the other characters.
Yeah, I think I'm speaking again, oops, but I think that's a big thing as well, of how will they interact. And I definitely have to think a lot about power structures, sometimes on a larger capitalistic scale, and sometimes on like an interpersonal scale that they might not even be aware of. And I think a lot of that is held in, I'm a Scorpio moon for context, but I think a lot of that is held in like, what do they keep so close that they will not share? Or are they passing that information out to anybody? Or is it the first thing that they say? Is this thing that they will not share? Is it also the first thing they get off their chest? And I think that creates the power structure that you need in order to have interactions for a slice of their life to be authentic.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Someone had said toward the beginning of the talk today that about kind of trying to just allow the character, create a space where the characters can just walk in and talk to you and just trying to hear them. And for me, it's a lot that it's like, I'm finding out who they are as I'm listening to them talk. And I'm listening to how they interact with other people. And I'm listening to also what they don't say in any given, scene, depending on who they're with, which was part of what was fun about my Expand Upon play was that, so it was this play where you meet two people and then you see one of those people with another character from the play, so in another part of their life, and then you see that character with a different person. And so we kind of got to see every character in at least two permutations of like who they are in the world. And that was really fun to play with, like, who is this person when they're talking to their spouse versus who is this person when they're talking to the people who work for them, or, whatever it may be. And what they hold back is just as important. But yeah, I feel like it's always a process of like just trying to tune in, like get that radio dial on the right frequency so I can hear them clearly.
Celeste, you raised your hand.
Yeah, it's the first time I've tried the little icon. Okay. Well, it's interesting because lately, because I've been having so many animal characters, I've been centering a lot of my plays around these animals. I've been doing extensive science research, on the biology and the behavior of these animals, and like what do they actually do in the world? Like what do they do? How do they actually interact? And like what I wrote, gills, gills, gills. I'm like, oh wow, there are some very interesting gender dynamics because of what these animals actually do. And that actually helped me figure out the characters, because the behaviors and the biology already kind of unleashed a story that seemed very clear to me, of the story that I wanted to take and where I wanted it to go. Like, oh wow, seahorses are the ones where the males give birth. That's interesting. I can, so that helped me tell the story. So like the literal science research has really been fun, to learn about animals, but then being able to tell these, I think, unique stories that I would never be able to do otherwise without that knowledge.
Well, Sian asked a question. How's COVID changed your perspective on playwriting? Are you writing more traditional plays still, or are you trying to change form for Zoom?
I'm doing both. So there's a traditional play that I had a chance to finish up, but also there's a play that I wrote beforehand that had a performance that I'm trying to adapt to Zoom. And in some ways, I think it would be easier if I just started out writing it for Zoom, because there's just some dynamics of it that I could put in. But in the adaptation of it, I'm finding that there's maybe some challenges. Not so much that the form itself doesn't lead itself to the dramatic action that's needed, but just how the screen changes happen. A lot of times, at least in my work, someone will be talking to another person face to face, but you're referring to someone really answering a question that came from behind them. People quite kind of look off a little bit. We spread that they'll look off to someone that they're not actually addressing it directly. And so having how that's going to actually work on stage, as well as, on Zoom, as well as passing items across from each other. We have to try to figure that out as well. Like if we need a character to hand something to someone else, one thing being a guitar, like I say, are we gonna have two guitars, gonna have these like phantom hands that are just gonna pass it over? So things like that we have to consider. So right, exactly like that. Just like that. So things like that to consider, but I'm trying to do both. Trying to still create for the traditional stage, but I was also thinking about Zoom as well.
Others?
I am decidedly not creating for Zoom. I am hopeful that we're going to be able to, in a year or so, go back to traditional theater. I personally feel like theater, it's very important for it to be live and for people to be in the same room. That's why I wanted to do theater as opposed to doing film, because I feel like there's an energy exchange between the actors and the audience, back and forth, that makes theater. Like, that is extreme to me. It's extremely important. So I'm not thinking of trying to create for Zoom, but I am thinking of other forms like novel writing.
I kind of ask because I did a play as an actor over Zoom, and it was the most heartbreaking thing in the world, because it did not feel even close. It felt adjacent to the thing that we're all grieving, and to almost touch it but not quite touch it was just so painful. And then at the same time, I kind of feel like I'm wasting time continuing to write plays for staged when what stage? So yeah, I think it's a weird time for playwrights right now, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just share that I've been actually pretty despondent. And this is the first, today is the first thing that I've done. It's like, and I was pretty nervous actually to come and talk about theater making, because I wasn't sure how it was going to make me feel. And I'm totally in awe of my colleagues who are like thinking expansively about how to make this work. And I think that there is so much opportunity around how our art form can shift and change and grow and become more accessible, and all, there's some really important, interesting things going on during this pause. And I really miss gathering with other people and exchanging energy. And it's helping me, I think, clarify what it is specifically about live performance that I think is so crucial. So that's good. I also wanted to say that my favorite playwright right now is not a playwright. It's a choreographer, Crystal Pike, who is incredible. Her company, Kid Pivot, is just making work that I think is as whole and complete artistically as any work can be. And it's so inspiring to me to see someone who's just like really freed from, really just pursuing her idea of how to tell a story on stage with bodies and mess with narrative. And man, I'm in love with her. Crystal Pike.
Yeah, I was just gonna chime in that I definitely agree that live theater is paramount. It's very important, and that's why I entered an MFA program in playwriting. However, it's to me very important to continue telling my stories, and I think there's a lot of evidence of how things like theater or television or movies have an opportunity to impact culture. And so I'm seeing this as an opportunity to find new audiences that I wasn't able to reach before. And I'm also very fortunate to be in school right now that offers TV pilot courses. I've already taken 2. Next semester, I'm taking a screenwriting course. So yeah, I'm totally getting into television and movie writing because there are so many people who watch those who don't watch theater. And and even when theaters do open up again, they're probably going to be at 60% capacity. It's going to take a while for them to be allowed to open up to 100% capacity, but also for people to feel confident in attending, really. So yeah, we just need to find other ways as well to reach people. And on the plus side, I'm a person who likes money. And so if things get sold, you tend to make more money from television or from selling a movie. So I think that would be great.
Well, Deborah Magalanes asked, do you had a character of yours suddenly reappear in your world, dreams, conversations, whatever. I am imagining a situation or experience similar to when a high school friend calls you out of the blue after 30 years. If so, how was it? What was it? So yeah, so has a character that you've written previously like revisited you years later, you know, or surprised you at different times, popping back into your life?
Kinda. I think not in such a magical way as described in the question that I wish maybe I had experienced, but in much more lucid ways. There have been moments of remembering something that a character taught me, especially, or like something that a character said, which I truly believe like I'm not the one writing what they're saying. So I think like there are things that characters have thought or said that I could not think or say that has come back to me to comfort me. And I have had a couple of times where I've like started to write a play and been reminded, usually of a short play that I've written or a scene that I've written that doesn't have a place yet. And that character suddenly knocking on the door. It's like, hey, this is the one for me. This is the full length that I was asking to be in. So that sometimes that does happen to me.
Well, so let me ask each of you, what is your favorite thing about playwriting, and what aspect of playwriting do you find to be the most challenging?
I can't remember who said it, but it was getting characters in and out of rooms. Like that's probably the most that's one of the most challenging things. So I have to get someone like in a room, out of a room, like, oh, is that the phone? And then they have to run out or something like that. So it's really that's like the most challenging. But the most rewarding is when, particularly during a performance, when I'm sitting perhaps in the back of the theater, and there's a heat that happens between the actors and the play that's happening on the stage there, and everyone in the room, everyone in the audience is invested in it. Right? I think that's the middle magic that happens there when everyone is like, okay, this is wanting to know what the next line is going to be, or what a character is going to say next, or what's going to happen there. That to me is just the most fun. So when that does happen, that's fantastic. And also as I'm writing it, when it just kind of flows, you have a good understanding about what each character wants and how they kind of try to manipulate the situation to get it.
Others?
I would say the most, well, having started out as an actor and going into playwriting because I wanted to be able to create characters for myself and for other Black actors that were deep, expansive, not stereotypical, and that were meaty, that the actors could really get into. So I would say that, I mean, there's so many rewarding things, but I would say that one of the most rewarding is watching an actor embrace their role and really happy that they have a good role and they have good lines and they have a journey that is interesting to go through. I would say the most challenging is trusting myself to write the story the way that I want to write it. So it usually ends up pretty good, but I would say that there's usually some doubt in the beginning that I'm actually going to be able to take this all the way through and have it come out the way that I'm envisioning it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, that for me, the most rewarding part is collaboration with actors, with director, with designer. You know, a play is not the finished thing. It's a map that points us to the finished thing, but you know, it's such a it's so terrifying and also such a wonderful gift, that moment where you hand your thing over to other people and then they begin to make real the world that's been living in your mind. There's nothing else that can compare to that. And yeah, I totally agree with Amintane. I was thinking the same thing, like when an actor falls in love with their character and they say to you, like, thank you so much for writing this person, like this real person. And like, that's the best. That's so great. I love rehearsal.
I think for me, the most challenging, kind of like to push back like ever so slightly, collaboration I think is so important, and you're totally right. Like that is the end product. Like I don't even like sending my scripts to people that much because I'm like, you're gonna read this? Do you know how to read a script? It's about it being produced. That's what it's for. But at the same time, I think the most challenging part is finding your people who are interested and invested in your work, who'll take the time to really understand what you're trying to do, as well as, you know, being able to collaborate and add their voice to it and make it better. That's usually the goal. But at the same time, that's like finding your people is kind of problematic. And I think that's a lot of issues that come into this industry, because it's like, oh, I'm a white man, I found my people, a bunch of other white men, and you know, and not wanting to take a risk in other people. So so it's a little problematic. But my favorite thing I would say is it's just expressing something that's been deep within me. I come up with a lot of ideas that I could write. I don't write the vast majority of them, but like when you get an idea that's like, this might actually express this weird little part of me that is hard to say, and just getting that idea and then like actually getting it on page, I think is miraculous.
Yeah, I think there's something so beautiful. I kind of purposely don't write. A lot of what I write is impossible to do, or I write things that can't happen in the natural world, or sometimes what we even understand of stage. And so I think when you're in the development process in a workshop and you're in that workshop, so you're in the room, I've had a lot of directors like turn to me and be like, how do I do that? Like, I don't know what that means. I think the most beautiful and magical thing is when they stop asking and they take hold of it. And I get to see like, okay, what is somebody else going to do that? Because it is collaboration. I don't really care how I imagined it would happen. The magic is seeing somebody else do it. But I think the most challenging thing about playwriting, kind of going off of what Stacey said, is making scenes long enough. I think I have a tendency to be like, okay, this is the thing that needs to happen in this scene. It happened, what's next? And then like swipe to the next thing. So I think that's something I have problems with.
I'm trying to think of what else to add. I think what I love about playwriting is that it's something that is so, it's your unique voice that gets to be expressed. And, you know, some of the challenges are the fact that to write, you're isolated, alone. For me, there are those self-doubts, whether or not I think I can ever finish it, which is part of why I need the structure of accountability for me to complete plays. I probably would not complete them on my own. So there are those challenges. And I also agree with that beauty that comes with that collaboration of completing something, and then these, especially if it's really well cast, and these actors taking these words that were in your head and making them real and alive. So that is beautiful. But I also agree that collaboration can also be challenging. Not everyone says things how I had them in my head. So sometimes there's that letting go. Like, okay, that actor chose to do that with that character. Do I say something because I want it to be different, or do I let that actor do their thing? And and then it becomes between the director and the actor. So I do feel like it's always navigating that voice that was so personal in my head to letting someone else make it their own.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so what does storytelling mean to you, and how do you feel like storytelling is, or why is storytelling important to society, or is it important to society? But what does storytelling mean to you?
Well, one thing I was thinking about is, especially writing creatively in the storytelling context, is making topics, especially like mirror stage topics and other topics, beyond that, more accessible to more diverse audiences. There are all these different ways of telling a story and all these different perspectives. And what I love about mirror stage is none of them are wrong. Like, there are, our perspective and how we want to tell our story, and that there isn't a universal way of doing that. Oops, I just stopped my video, dang it. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so I think it's just that creative process of being able to give voice.
Yeah, I kind of already talked about it a little bit, but just how it can affect culture. Stories are very good at normalizing things, and it can be normalizing something for good or for bad. It can normalize, make you think that it's okay to be homophobic, for example, whether it's all the villains are gay, or the gay characters are so one-sided and they're meant to be laughed at. And it can also go the other way, which we're seeing a little bit more of. For example, we just got that Hulu show, Love, Victor, and also Big Little Fires. I'm totally messed up that name, but like there are just a lot more increasing amount of examples of just seeing, for example, queer people in stories. And I think it just and it's not necessarily about their sexuality. I mean, it is about their sexuality because it needs to be, and it can't, we don't want it to be erased, but they're at least done in a way that humanizes queer people, which, they're humans. So like, that's just like an example. And I think that's one thing that's very powerful about storytelling, because people look to stories, TV, film, plays, books, etc., for how to, little fires everywhere, someone said, Suzanne said. They look to these stories on how to behave. We don't always know how to react when something new happens, but sometimes you can point at something and say, hey, I saw that, now I'm just going to imitate that. Those mirror neurons that we have from childhood, that's what we have an opportunity to do, in my opinion.
I agree with that 100%. Yeah, just everything Trey said. Ditto. I mean, it has so much, and it's going to give so much, good or bad, credence to a person's position, but at the same time can open up the conversation so much more. So, I mean, so many people learn through stories. They get their perspectives through stories. They get their positions and a certain point of view through stories. They get their thoughts about what to think about something forthcoming through story. Right? So it is, I think the power of story just cannot be denied. You can give someone a paper with statistics on it, and they'll just ignore that, but you tell them the story around it, and that's what they're gonna take from it.
Yeah, I think I really agree with that, and that storytelling, you can have this idea of what a person is, what this archetype of person is that you've never met, or you can have an idea of how conversations go that you've never actually heard. And storytelling lets somebody who's never experienced that actually experience it, whether it is magic, whether it is that childlike thing that they did as a kid that they thought was gone, that they can see and remember themselves like, oh, that fire still exists, or if it is oh, cool, gay people actually have conversations. Who knew? So I think it's really important that it goes both ways. And I think storytelling has this magical power to bring something way bigger than it is in reality, or something that you're never actually going to find in everyday life. So maybe that helps people connect to it more. And through that larger than life existence, you can really hit something painfully true, which I think is really powerful.
I agree. I agree with everything that everybody has said. And I believe that storytelling is just fundamental to our life. Everybody's life is a story, multiple stories. And, you know, we've been sitting here for almost an hour or 2 hours, I guess. And we've been telling stories. And so I think that it's the way that we experience each other. It's the way that we experience our world. It's kind of like our shared space. And so I think that there's really nothing outside of storytelling. I think even if you have an equation, 1 + 1 = 2, that's still a story. So I think it's pretty much embedded into our reality.
Well, are there any other questions that the attendees would like to ask the playwrights? We have a few minutes left. I do want to thank you all for joining us and for making time in your lives to participate in this discussion. Because yeah, I think it's, we had done a little mini panel with Holly and Trey last August or September. I don't remember. I think it was August. So to kind of hear from a broader range of perspectives and approaches has made it that much meatier a discussion. So again, I appreciate each of your willingness to take on the challenge of the commission for writing for Expand Upon and blazing new trails for yourselves and your own work, and partnering with us in creating some new plays around some ambitious topics and bringing the stories and narratives of different characters to the stage to help us initiate conversations and dialogue to get people thinking more about these issues. That storytelling is such an important way to do that, and using theater as the vehicle, as the method. Yes, in days, like in days like today, I don't know what that even is supposed to mean, but with the challenges that we're currently facing, the constraints of coronavirus and that are keeping us from being able to gather in the same room and to experience the stories with the actors live on stage and the audience all in the same room. I'm glad that we are able to use this forum, this platform, as a medium in the meantime, at least, to still try to figure out a way to stay connected and to continue telling some important stories. So again, if there aren't any other questions that anybody would like to ask, I want to thank you again, each of you, for participating. Next month, the second Saturday, August 8th, we'll be doing a version of Hollywood Squares, Seattle style. So we have 9 local Seattle artists who will be the squares. We have 2 players and we'll be playing for charity. And so we hope that you will join us for that. We're also in the process of developing a podcast that will be launched August 17th. And so we'll be sharing more information about that on our website and in our e-news. So if there's anything else that anybody would like to share before we sign off for the evening.
Just to say thank you. This is great. It's great seeing everyone and having a chance to talk about it. So fantastic.
Okay, well, thank you again. And we'll go ahead and sign off now. And the video of this live stream should continue to be available on our YouTube channel. So again, we hope to see you next month. And thank you all again for participating.
Thank you.
everyone.